boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to the Mental Dialogue Talk Show. I'm your, I'm, I'm sorry, just my 3 cents podcast. I messed that up. I had my light wrong and got thrown off. For those that know, I do the Saturday show every Mental Dialogue. This is actually the Just My 3 cents rapid fire live broadcast where you can jump on and give us your 3 cents. Again, just my 3 cents on race, sex, and culture, where I basically will open with a topic and you can discuss the topic I'm discussing or bring up any issues you know that are happening in, I guess in culture, if you will, in reference to race, sex, and culture that you want to bring up, and we can have dialogue about it. But tonight in particular, I call this particular just my 3 cents, called it Black Death, COVID, Murder, and Police Shootings by the Numbers. Black Death, COVID-19, Murder, and Police Shootings by the number. And so I really wanted to get into, again, something that to a degree that a lot of people know me for on the Mental Dialogue Talk Show, which is always trying to bring some data to kind of back up things that I'm saying, and people always talk about, doing the research, but it's really just a lot of information gathering or whatever. But the thing that I always talk about, and people always talk about how, in a sense, stats and things of that nature can be manipulated, which is absolutely true. And quite often what we do, when we're searching for data, if you will, we'll search with the confirmation bias. We'll have an idea of what we're looking for. And the reality is, whether it's data or anything that you go research, you can find what you're looking for. And so I kind of try to pride myself in the idea of trying to provide all data that I have in some form of context. Because if you understand just the idea of communicating and having dialogue, that ultimately, even if you and I are speaking the same language, if what I'm saying lacks some context, you won't understand me. And so ultimately, communication takes place through context. And that's the aspect of understanding data and effectively understanding what's being, shared with you via that data. And so getting into tonight's discussion, I'm probably going to share some perspectives and some data that will break down the narratives that you tend to believe based on what the data actually shows. And so the place that I'm really going to start with is a narrative that we now understand has been changed, but to give you a little history on a narrative that's not related directly to Black Death. But as you see this narrative change, then you might be able to receive the information I give you today with some form of validity. Because if you never watched me or don't know my history, you know that, again, that ultimately I try to provide data in full context. And part of providing data in full context is not necessarily putting my spin on it. It's trying to provide you most of the data or all of the data so that you can come to a conclusion versus somebody who may have presented you one point in the data. I really make a huge effort not to present data with confirmation bias. And so a narrative that we now know has changed greatly is what we see happening around the marijuana laws, right? So for the most part, I forgot the number of states, but there's a lot of states that marijuana has become fully legal, right? And then there's on the medical level. And so for the most part, we know that our country, if you will, is heading towards legalizing marijuana for the most part, right? But the reality to getting to that space is 100 years ago, marijuana got demonized in a couple of places, and marijuana spent 100 years trying to change the narrative to what we see today, because there's no data that backs up, or no science that backs up, that marijuana should be classified, in a sense, in the higher classifications with other drugs that are manufactured or made, or these other addictive drugs. And so now that we've accepted the reality, we see marijuana laws, pretty much going away, if you will. But in Utah, that's where marijuana was first, in a sense, demonized, because it was something that, in a sense, Mexican immigrants who were coming to the country and landmen in the fields, they were using it. And so that culture used it to demonize them. And then the next place that it got made illegal was in New Jersey. There was a case where this guy had murdered someone, and a doctor had made reference to that guy had been on marijuana, and that he basically smoked a little marijuana, and it made him paranoid and wanted him to fly out the window. And so this doctor, being prominent at the time in this murder trial, that was pushed in the paper about how marijuana crazy it would make you. Now, there was no scientific backing to that, because but you also had at the time hemp competing with the tree industry, if you will, right? As far as, a viable option for, making it or whatever. And so that industry definitely wanted to push that narrative to, in a sense, get hemp illegal, and marijuana spent 100 years trying to get removed from this negative narrative, to the point that when you went through Woodstock, and right after Woodstock, basically, you even seen places where marijuana had higher sentencing than even cocaine and heroin, as that started getting into the society in the 60s and 70s. There were times, like I know for a fact, in the state of Virginia, you would get a lot larger sentence for marijuana, strictly because of political narratives against it. And so again, now we're in an age where it took 100 years to remove that narrative. So now that I've given that context for how one narrative took 100 years, so when I start presenting this information on Black death, murders in reference to COVID-19 murders, and even police shootings, then maybe you can understand you've been sold a bag of good on the narratives that we now accept about these things, in particular Black death. So I'm going to start down a path. If you've been a long time follower, you've probably heard some of this before, but I want to give you some actual numbers. And again, you can jump on and disagree or agree, or make sure you look at the link below on YouTube, Facebook. You can jump on and get in this thing with me. But here's the context to get right into the numbers. So unfortunately, in the last year or two since COVID, we've seen about a 30% increase in Black murders in the last 2 years, and that's getting highlighted, and I'm pretty sure you've heard something about it. And then of course there's always the unfortunate Chicago, where the murder rate is increasing, or whatever. And so basically we had this long drop on the murder rate, and then in the last couple of years we had a 30% increase in particularly Black murders, right? And so so people are saying, oh man, what's going on, whatever. And so here's the dialogue that we hear. Here's the narrative that there's always comes out, right? So I talked about Black murders, and we talk about police shootings, right? And so there's this concept, right, that the Black community cares less about Black murders than they do police shootings, right? There's always this concept and this narrative that's always pushed. When we see, saying a police shooting, or George Floyd or something of that nature, then there's always the narrative that comes right behind it about, what about Black on Black murders? And so that dialogue has existed for the last 15, 20 years of my life. And, and counts on what side of the political aisle you on, you may be on one side or the other. And so here's an argument that you always hear in reference to, in a sense, why people attempt to bring up Black on Black murder, or even Black people will end up sometimes saying, where's the outrage when we kill one of ourselves, and things of that nature. And so, I've done a full video on the police shootings to have a perspective. So I'm not going to go as deep into that, but I wanted to give you some numbers. So, for example, police shootings, with the media narrative, and when those things are highlighted, and it's particularly when it's a white cop and a Black person or whatever, there's always that dialogue where the police shoot white people too, but you don't see that on TV. The reality is the news media is in the financial game as well, right? They need more eyes on their stations, and so whatever will resonate and get them eyes, they're going to push. And here's the reality. So sometimes people will even have the concept that they won't even push when a white cop kills a white man or something to that nature. The reality is that story does not bring the eyes, and it's not even about there's an agenda, if you will. That story does not bring the eyes, because there's a narrative based on some historical facts about, again, our dealings with the police as the African American community, and people being, in a sense, murdered sometimes for no reason. So So what happens is when one of those cases happen, the media is going to have heavy coverage. And quite often, as we've seen with George Floyd and other cases, especially since Black Lives Matters has come to the forefront, you'll see these level of protests. And the reason that is typically is it's usually in an instance where there looks like, based on whatever video there was or whatever, where there's maybe some foul play, and it's typically an unarmed situation. Because here's the truth about police shootings: about 3 happen every day. There's about 3 police shootings every day. And so on the average year, we'll get about 900 to 1,000, typically around 900 police shootings every year. This past year, we had 1,004. So we usually don't hit 1,000. So in a sense, that sounds like a lot of shootings, and it is compared to other countries. The United States pretty much leads the world in police shootings, if you will, right? And so now walk through me with this narrative as I walk you through the numbers. So think about what narratives you hear, and I'm just gonna, if you listen to this data as is, you'll be able to figure out the truth versus the narrative. So that's, I just said, United States has more police shootings, right? And so boom, that alone could say, oh, that's an issue, right? But keep in mind, when we're leading the world, we are, we have 300 something million people, which were bigger than a lot of countries. Again, I'm just trying to walk you through the numbers. So at 3 a day, on average, there'll be 2 whites killed and 1 black person killed on average per day. Obviously, there's the Hispanic culture as well, but I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to walk you through the numbers on average so that you figure out the truth versus what you might hear in the news. So 2 whites are killed pretty much daily, 1 black killed per daily. If you just go by those numbers alone, like, wow, that's a lot of police shootings. The reality of those, we'll use 1,000 because that's what happened this past year, and that's an easy number. The reality is, I've looked at a study where they did a 5-year aggregate, just to kind of see what's been, try to get a good trend. So on the 5-year aggregate study, they basically found that 84% of those shootings will be, unfortunately, of armed suspects who are also intending to harm the police. So if you hear the numbers without hearing the number I just said, it just sounds like our police do a lot of shooting. But in 84% of those cases, let me start this before for anybody listening. I'm walking down the truth of the data, not because I'm on a side, and I just want to, again, get away from the media manipulation and help you understand how it happens, because again, I'm going to get to Black death in general. I'm just walking through this process to get to the Black death. So I just want to be clear, because I don't want you getting exposed to data and think that I'm on a side. I just want you to objectively listen to the data, and you'll figure it out for yourself. When you get context, you don't need my opinion. Okay, so just wanted to get that clarity before I start going on this path and somebody think I'm pushing an agenda here. So anyway, back to the numbers. So 84% of those assailants, unfortunately, will be trying to harm the police. So that leaves about 16%. Well, that leaves 16% of people who may be unarmed. Well, out of that unarmed group, 25% of those may be African Americans. And so it may be one of those cases that becomes the Trayvon Martin of the, I mean, not, that wasn't a police situation, but I'm just saying one of these ones that may get highlighted. So when you have a few cases that get highlighted in the media, because if it was just simply that police killings was the issues, that we could have one of these cases every day, but there's not going to be an issue when the assailant's trying to harm the police, right? So I'm just trying to identify what the news is doing, and to a degree why they're doing it. And this is not even to go against them, it's just the reality of a capitalistic society. So what happens is you got 16% of cases to even pull from. I've already mentioned the reality that, believe it or not, for the most part, because of the narratives that we accept in this country, the news is not going to get a lot of eyes for a policeman killing a white person. That's just the truth of the matter. It's just, that's the truth. Then that leaves that 25%, right, of those African Americans who are unarmed that you may get a couple of cases from. So the reality is, last year, 235 blacks were killed or whatever. And so if you cut that down to 16%, for the unarmed, on average, you may have about 25 blacks. I'm just giving an average over a 5-year aggregation that may be killed by police unarmed. It's never okay to be killed for no reason. Let me make that real clear. But do you realize that there are 8 million? I'm sorry, let me get my numbers right. I want to make sure I'm giving you the correct numbers. there are, hold on, let me just put this in perspective. Let me find it. I had this in my head, so I want to make sure I tell it to you right. 2022. There's, oh man, I don't see the number. I don't want to tell you the wrong number. There's like almost 300. Oh, that don't sound right. I thought I might have forgot to write that one number down. I wanted to tell you the number of interactions that the police has. Oh my God, I forgot to write that. Oh, here it is. 375 million contacts per year with the police. There's about 70,000. There's about 700,000 policemen around the country. They interact with citizens at 375 million contacts, right? And so now let's keep walking with me. I don't have an agenda here. Just walk through what the data shows versus the narrative you may have in the news. So it doesn't make it okay for an average of 25 unarmed African Americans to be killed. It's never okay, especially when it's done indiscriminately. That's never okay. But I want to put that in context of 375 million interactions, and there may be 25 African Americans on average killed per year. So what people like to compare it to when they start talking about the black on black, when you're talking about police interactions. So what they like to do, watch how these numbers work. So they'll say, well, in all reality, is it the police shooting a bunch of African Americans? Now, the reality is within that 16%, blacks are 2.5 times more likely to be shot unarmed than whites. That's a real number. So again, I'm not on the side, I'm just walking you through the numbers. And so what they love to compare is, well, if you look at how many blacks were killed in the year, which is usually around 200, 300, and then like I said, when you narrow it down to those who are unarmed, that might be 25 to 40 blacks killed per year. And then they love to put it up against the yearly black on black murders, right? So watch these numbers. So if the cops have shot 25 to 40 blacks in a given year unarmed after 375 interactions with the entire country, but you compare it to the number of black on black murders, which this past year up 30% was 9,913,000 black on black murders. And so then they push the narrative. Yeah, well, why does the black community seem to care about that 9,913 murders, of which 87% were done by other African Americans? So that narrative gets pushed because they're saying, hey, now this looks pretty obvious when you look at the numbers, right? I just broke down that 25 on a bad year, maybe 40 African Americans are killed unarmed by the police. But when you compare it to usually about an average of 7 to 9, a high, we're back into a high year with this 30% increase, 9,000 black murders, of which 87% in the last 5 years were done by other African Americans. Then it looks like, oh, that makes logical sense. Oh, I got some comments. Let me look at the comments. That makes logical sense. Why are they not concerned? Why are they not concerned with the black on black murders, right? So just look at those numbers. Now, here's the real joint I want to get to. So while that logically may make sense, let me put it up against the COVID numbers. And let me tell you why I'm bringing this into the conversation. Again, there's no agenda here. It's just comparing the actual data to the reality. So the COVID numbers, we both know that COVID-19 has been politicized. You may not be caring about the politics, but we know that we know. Good question, Dr. King. I'll get to you. We know that it's been politicized, so you may fall on the side of, in a sense, people say it's fear mongering to talk about the COVID deaths, right? Or those who actually don't care about it, right? So we're told that in one narrative, why don't we care about this past year, the 9,000 black murders versus maybe the 25 unarmed, why we don't care about that. So we're told to care about these things. Meanwhile, the first year of COVID, 60,000 African Americans died. I'm going to give you full context because, again, it may sound like I have an agenda here. So of the 60,000, we're at about 75,000 now in a year and a half. But in the first year, I want to keep everything on a 1 year. You can still make sure the numbers are consistent. That's another way people manipulate your numbers. I want to give everything consistent. So about 60,000 African Americans died. I'm not going to leave it there because here's another reality. We know that 80% of those were 65 and above. But if you take 20% of 60,000, that's 12,000 people under 65 that died. So when you think about the politics of COVID, half the country gives a damn and half a country doesn't give a damn. So we're not, even as an African American community, regardless of what side of it you're on, we're not really overly concerned about those 60,000 or even 12,000 under 65 that died for COVID. Why are we not concerned? Because we kept hearing this number, the 1% people die. We've been told that 1% isn't we've been told that 1% isn't something that we have to be concerned about. Again, regardless of what side you're on, the idea that we could be dismissive of 12,000 deaths of people under 65, 60,000 deaths in a year. And again, regardless of what side you're on, the reality is we do, even if you care about it, we know there are people who are dismissive of that number, yet we're told we should be very concerned about the 9,000 murders that happen, and that it's a black problem, and that black, that it's such a black problem. Here's the reality: 9,000 deaths is, unfortunately, if we literally had one person that murdered each person. So it wasn't a person that, let's say, let's walk through this. 9,000 people, 900, to be honest, 9,913 murders. 87%, say 80% were killed by other blacks. But if each one of those persons was killed by one other black person, let's put it in context. It's 45 million African Americans in the country. So 99.9999% of us would never be involved in a murder. Let me say that again. 9,913 murders. So if you just hear the murder rate alone, it's up 30%, right? It's up 30%. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but when you're told only that in the media, because here's the history for why black on black murder has been demonized as if it's a significant black issue. It's because a drug war was started in 1969 by President Richard Nixon, demonizing, in his eyes, his enemies, the black community and the far left hippies, if you will. And because they smoked a lot of marijuana, remember the beginning of this show? The marijuanas were demonized from 100 years ago. So he just upped the ante. And by the 80s, there were more people going to prison in this country for drugs. So over the context of 1969, by the 80s, and get the drug war that we hear about, it was actually started by Nixon, not Reagan. By the time it gets to the 80s, there's more people going to prison for drugs than all other crimes combined. So I'm going to try to give this context here. So we've been hearing this term black on black murder as if it was a black issue, as if we didn't care about it based on a political narrative. But we're right now, to this day, again, you may be concerned with the deaths that have happened. Again, I don't want to overemphasize 1% dying from the COVID infectious disease that might die, that catch it, right? The 1% that might die, that basically has led to 900,000 over the last couple of years deaths in the country. Again, but within the black community specifically, 60,000. If we can be dismissive of that number, then is it really a real concern to the entire black community if we lose? Again, this is not to minimize any deaths, but is it really an entire concern to the entire black community if we lose 7,000, 9,000? And I'm talking about a political narrative that's been pushed when 99.999% of us will never be involved in a murder. I'm going to get my girl DeAsia about to come on this thing with me. I'm going to say one last thought, and I want to get your thoughts. I want to put it in full context. So in this last year, when the murder rate for black African Americans specifically is up 30%, there's this one neighborhood, because we always hear about Chicago, where they've had 38 murders. They had 38 murders, and it's only 17,000 people. I don't know the name of the area in Chicago. And so that murder rate works out to the highest in the country, like 200 deaths per 100,000, right? Like that works out. And so what happens is they have a real issue in that district. But if you go back to the 90s, when the 94 crime bill got passed, and we had when the murder rate was its highest, the imprisonment rate was at its highest. So when you go back to that, we was getting laws passed around the country, and we were hearing about Chicago. But in my 3 stoplight town where I'm from, we fell under the same laws that Chicago was falling under, LA was falling under, Philly was falling under, based on a so-called drug war in our community, and we don't kill nobody. Because most of 99.9% of African Americans would never be involved in a murder, but we were colorizing high crime areas. That's a high crime area based on what's going on, but we'll treat Chicago like that's what all of America does. Go ahead, Queen. Thank you for jumping on with me.
Oh, no problem. You made some very interesting points and gave us a lot to actually think about, which made me think about this particular thing. Has anybody ever thought to do the numbers on white crime
Yeah, I know
outside of just the police? Huh?
I know them. So for the
Yeah,
most part,
because I'm curious to know, like, at what rate or the percentage of whites killing whites. Because my thing is, people
I'll tell it
kill
real quick. Let me tell
people
it to you.
within
Let me tell it to
proximity.
you. This to make your thought. Let me tell it to you. So, any given time, if you look at it at different time, it's going to be anywhere about 78% to about 84% or whatever. Because at the end of the day, all crime is crimes of proximity. For the most part,
Right.
most people, only about 9% of murders are done by strangers or whatever. For the most part, it's friends, people you know, associations or whatever. So it's just crimes of proximity. Whether we like to believe it or not, segregation is still, unfortunately, relatively a real thing as far as where we live. So you kill people where you live or whatever. So killing people where you live ends up not being a race thing at all. We just have areas in the country where there are high crime issues. And the one thing that's always consistent in the high crime issue is the lack of unemployment. I'm going to give you one more number and I'll let you jump back in. So, for example, around the country, youth unemployment is usually way higher than adult unemployment, which makes sense, right? So it averages around about 17%. Well, in Chicago and Philly and Baltimore, you'll see unemployment of youth around 40 to 50%. In Chicago, when Reverend Michael Fledger, the guy that's well known for trying to combat what's happening in Chicago, he started a midnight basketball league that severely affected, in a sense, the murder rate for a short period of time. From what I understand, he's no longer allowed to do it. I don't know the details behind it, but I'm just pointing out employment, economics shows you what will happen to a community. Race doesn't show you anything. Go ahead, Queen.
Okay, so do you know the number of, like, how many white people? Well, I did hear when you were saying that the as far as the police shootings is kind of with the white and black, it's pretty much 2 to 1. Now as far as like the civilians, basically, because when they talk about black on black crime, they're talking about the civilians, like your regular everyday people committing crimes against each other or murdering each other. I say that. So do you know the number of, like, white people who have actually killed other white people within the year?
Well, like I said, I don't, because I want to make sure I'm telling you correctly. I just saw the number, but I don't. But it's right now. It's either 78% or 82%. I just don't remember.
Yeah, so it's pretty much like, so basically it's pretty much like at the same rate as with black people then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I say crimes
Yeah.
or crimes of proximity, race should be taken out of it. You're gonna kill where you live.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the reason why it be tripping me out when people be like, "Oh, black on black crime and black people are killing each other at this fast rate," when they're not looking at the fact that white people are actually out here. They're doing the same thing, but they're not even taking it into consideration. So that's good that giving them
Let me be
that
very factual
information and
about
the
it.
numbers.
Yeah, let me be very factual about it because there is a difference between white on white murders and black on black murders. Here's the murder rate. I don't mind giving the numbers as is. So right now,
Okay.
the white murder rate is all the way down to 2.2 per 100,000. Okay, the black murder rate in the country is 15, so it's 7 times 15 per 100,000. So it's 7 times the white or whatever. But here it is. Let's put it in the context of how many people in the country. See, in the jail system, only 0.2% are there for murder. So we don't really have a context of understanding that we got people that ain't worried about the 60,000 people that I'm going to bring this up on purpose. Worried about the 60,000 people that COVID just killed but we're supposed to be overly concerned about something that 99.999% of the country won't even be involved in. So even at 15 per 100,000. But here's the reality. The 90s, it was high as 30. So LA, for example, you had I watched your podcast and y'all brought up LA real quick on your podcast. Just throw that out there real quick, the hip hop podcast, right? I watched the brother say, yeah, what's going on in LA? Well, I always like to big up the brother Big U, if you ever heard of him. They got programs where they are now getting, in a sense, those LA gangbangers, if you will, right? Where they're getting them jobs. And they've decreased the murder rate in LA by 60% since the 90s. 60%. Nobody gives any media hype or prop to the reality that they've decreased it by 60%. And here's the reality of LA. We just saw the little crazy stuff at the Kodak Black getting shot, right? And so our mind goes to a narrative. And even Ice-T tweeted out there's 60,000 gang members, after he got shot. 60,000 gang members in a city of 3.9 million is 1% of the population. So I need people to understand context. So to say, and of those 60,000 out in LA, that's going to be mostly Hispanics. Let's keep it a buck. So they ain't even 1%. You see what I'm saying? So that 1% ain't even all black people. But I just want to put these numbers in context. When you understand that even the gang problem is affecting less than 1% of the African-American community. And then when we see, unfortunately, who I'm a big fan of, the loss of a Nipsey Hussle, right? And he sold a Nipsey Hussle to another gang member. We will run with the narrative, look at what black people do instead of reducing it to the reality that, unfortunately, Nipsey lifestyle got him involved in that 1%. And that was the result of something that was within their culture, got nothing to do with what black people are doing. Again, I admire that brother and I hate that we lost him, but that's not a black person issue. That's not our problem when 99.99% of 9% of African Americans won't even ever consider murdering anyone. And so if we can be dismissive of 60,000 black deaths by COVID, why the hell should we really be concerned about? Not, again, this is not saying death is okay, but we're being treated like we have a black problem. How is something a black problem if 99.9% of blacks will never be involved in a murder?
Yeah, that's true. And I know you ain't gonna be on here too much longer, but I am gonna say this really quick. I think the reason why, if you notice, that's just like with COVID out the way, if we don't even think about COVID, more people be moved by someone actually getting murdered and actually getting their life taken away than them losing their life due to a health issue. Like sometimes people find a little solace in the fact that, they died from a health issue. If you notice that, if you see people posting on social media RIPs and stuff, you'll have a whole bunch of people asking, how did they die? And it's not really asking how did they die just to be nosy or they want to know what happened, but it's kind of like a lot of people be okay with the fact that, okay, it was a health issue versus somebody, it was like a tragic thing that happened. It was like a surprise thing that happened or whatever. And the fact that when COVID hit and the way that it was brought to us and it was all this fear mongering and everything, and they presented it like, if you get it, you're gonna meet your demise, and you hear the numbers and all these people dropping or whatever. It's kind of like they kind of prepared you in a sense to where you kind of like expected it, so you don't feel a way about it as much, but it shouldn't be any difference in the way that you feel about it, but it's just the way that the mind works, where a lot of people, they kind of put their guards down. They be like, oh, okay, they could sleep at night and knowing that, hey, okay, this person passed away and it was from COVID. Okay, it's a virus, it's killing folks out here, and they kind of be cool with it. Where else with the crime rate and the murder rate between black people or even the police or whatnot, people don't really they don't really concern themselves when it's a health condition, when they should, because at the end of the day, regardless of how you lost somebody.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Let me go ahead and jump my man God Killer on here, and let me get some of these comments
Okay.
as well. Thank you for jumping on with me, Queen.
Okay, no
All
problem.
right, y'all, I'm gonna stay on. So I got some comments because I haven't been right to the comments. So God Killer, I'm gonna do these comments real quick, and then I got you coming on real next. We'll stay on a little bit longer. So couple of comments that I wanted to highlight. Jendai, you asked, what is your suggestion to reduce the COVID numbers of death in the Black community? Well, I'm an advocate of the vaccine, so I'm just going to simply say, get the vaccine, because unfortunately, just to highlight other numbers, and just to give a perspective, again, we're told in the media to be concerned with the 30% rising of Black on Black murders, and we're just cool about the Black deaths every year. But here's the unfortunate reality: in the first year, the Black life expectancy rate dropped 3.7 years. It had jumped higher for the Hispanics at 3.9 years. 1 year for the entire country. The last time we had a drop that deep, that drop was, World War II. So the world was at war the last time we had a drop in life expectancy that long. So yeah, I'm definitely advocating get the vaccine, because what the vaccine is doing is definitely limiting deaths. So that's my recommendation. One more comment, then I'm gonna go to God Killer. Dr. King says, yeah, from 1980, it was 84%, to go back to what Deasia asked. It was 84% of white homicides were killed by other whites. These numbers are, the media needs to make their money. I'm not demonizing the media. I'm not demonizing the news. But a tragic death is obviously naturally going to carry more concern. I get it. But here's where there's zero truth, and then I'm bringing on God Killer. There's zero truth to this idea that African Americans don't care about Black on Black. When I say zero truth, here's the zero truth. The reason I know that it's zero truth, because what happens is, yes, you may see protests when the media highlights an unarmed situation between a white cop and a Black person being killed. So you may see the protest and the outrage because it's being covered in the news. People will say, hey, look at the outrage for that. But where's the outrage for Black on Black murder? Here's where the outrage is. It's teachers taking their salaries, trying to ensure that the students that are going through their high school are not becoming statistics. It's the coaches that volunteer to do little league programs for free to ensure that these kids don't become statistics. It's the rites of passage programs. It's the church programs. It's all of the thing that takes real work that people do inside these communities, and are devastated anytime one of these, Black on Black, since I don't even like the term, is used. They're absolutely devastated. There's never a time that we're not concerned, but the reality too, the number of murders that are happening is minimal to the most of the country. Does that make sense? I'm gonna get my man Uncle on here and see what he has to say. Go ahead, King, jump on this thing real quick. I'm extending it because I got people still commenting, and you want to jump on.
Oh yeah, man. I just think we had an unusual amount of charlatans that all waded in on the COVID situation. Luckily for brothers like you and me, man, that we like started beating the drum real early in the game. Maybe a whole year prior to the pandemic. I know I started this vaccine thing, and people were like, "Well, why'd you do that?" I just had a conversation with the family, and they was uneducated on it, and I realized, well, I like to take that conversation to the greater community, and I did. It was a whole year prior to the pandemic. As a matter
Yep.
of fact, I actually debated the Europeans. I took the fight to the Europeans because I felt like this was actually the source of the information.
Yeah, let me
And
jump in on that though. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off intentionally because I do
no,
want
that's
to
fine.
bring it. I
That's
want to
fine.
bring it home to the Black deaths. I just
Mhm.
highlighted the COVID numbers as a real number, whether you thought were concerned about it, to highlight there was all these African Americans that we lost, to highlight how the media pushes this narrative about Black death, and there's always this argument, even within our own community, of whether we care about Black on Black murders or not. And I'm sitting here going, we lose 60,000 to COVID, and we're told to be concerned with this 30% increase, which is a real thing. But this a real thing in the neighborhoods that it's happening in. But we take it on as a collective as if we're having this problem. I understand that there was a rise in murders in Chicago. There's been a slight uptick of murders in Atlanta. When I say slight, if I gave you the numbers, it's not a real uptick compared to previous to the pandemic. It's a small uptick. But In Atlanta, we don't live in a high murder rate city. Let's just keep it a buck. But we will hear something happen. We will hear Nipsey Hussle get killed in LA. And I heard people in Atlanta talking about why we always kill ourselves. Well, it's 1% of the LA population that's involved in gangs. So 99% of the LA population is not. So how is that black people killing themselves? You understand what I'm saying? So I want to just say, hey, we got this other number that we can just be real dismissive of. The COVID number, we had 75,000, I think, deaths now, but in the first year was 60,000. We don't even think about that number, but we have our community out here arguing over something that 99.99% of the community will never be involved in, which is a murder. So that's the dialogue I'm really trying to have versus focusing on COVID. I'm just showing how we can be dismissive of this high number and we accept the narrative of black on black murder when all it really is there are areas that have high crime. It should be no race associated with high crimes area. It should be called what it is. Black people don't have a problem with black murder as far as having a problem with it, and we are concerned. I've never seen a murder happen that the few that I know of that everybody in the community wasn't concerned and upset that it happened. But if that criminal is apprehended and sentenced fairly and sentenced to jail, there ain't gonna be no protest for somebody that's about to go to jail. Like, people really have this misconstrued idea of what concern is, and the concern shows up in the work of a teacher taking a lesser salary to ensure that students don't become one of those statistics. Go ahead, King.
So the point I was really trying to make is that I wanted to hit the issue head on. Having that debate kind of showed the world that there's concerned black people that understand the issue of a health crisis before it comes. So our being undereducated on said subject.
You got to help me see how this relates to what I'm talking about tonight. I don't know
you
how.
Gotta let me finish. You got to let me finish. You can't. You cut me off twice. You cut me off twice. You cut me off twice.
Yeah, you just seem to go down a path I'm not trying to go down.
Okay, but you can't. Well, I can hold it, and I don't want to argue with you on your show because I know what I was about to say.
Yeah, so is it relating to?
Of course, but you won't let me get it out. You're doing the normal Montoya thing. Let me do my thing, Montoya. I know what the dialogue is about. And I'm saying it's undereducation on said subject that allows you to put the importance of the whole fucking issue down here. And you think shooting at each other is a higher factor. It's not. See, you gotta let me get there. Let me bring it home.
Go ahead, bro.
It's always about the education, baby. And see, once you educated, right, on platforms like the Mental Dialogue, right, the Bobby Banger Show, Pseudo Killers, right, then you can understand the importance of the health risks that we're in right now. Like you said, anytime you hear that word, life expectancy has dropped, that's deep.
Because it hasn't really happened except for
that's deep. Wars, and that's deep.
Yeah, life expectancy goes up. It's been going up for 100 years, except for a few points.
Facts. So a virus, right, is public enemy number one to the world, but it has been marginalized in the black community based off of the educational level on the subject. Watch this. Based off of charlatans that dove in and smoothed it down like, oh, it ain't nothing. Right. Remember, that's what the charlatans did.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, it ain't all nothing. The pseudos did that. Oh, it's not that much. Yo, we got crime to deal with in our neighborhood. Yeah, but the crime rate didn't drop the life expectancy. Most black people aren't gangbangers, and most black people don't sell drugs, bro. But most black people will be affected by the virus. So this is public enemy number one, and that was my point.
I respect
That's what I wanted to say.
No, I love it. And I'm just trying to get to it quicker because I like to keep the time short.
I know we good. I got it there. We're good. Appreciate you.
Very important. Very important. Very important. Thank you, King. Yeah. I'm gonna end the show like I always do.
Appreciate you, bro.
Yep. Reading. I want to see what I see. One comment here. Charlatans are indeed on both sides of the pandemic. The science. There's no charlatan if you have science to back you up.
Right.
I'm talking about actual studies that could be peer reviewed, not anecdotal studies that are quite often pushed forward. As a matter of fact, early in the pandemic, just to highlight this because you made this comment, Queen, early in the pandemic, there were anecdotal studies about, for example, that we always hear about. I'll give one example. There's plenty more than one, but I'll give the example of ivermectin, right? And so those anecdotal, they were scientists and doctors who were claiming this was claiming, this was something that could help with COVID or whatever. They were anecdotal because they wasn't done on a massive clinical trial level. And so because they were getting pushed so strong, the science community actually did full studies on them. And so there have been studies now that negate that 100%. And here's the crazy part about ivermectin, just an example. And Queen, you may not have been talking about it, but I'm just showing you an example of when you say there are charlatans on both sides. There is no charlatan when you talk about science being done correctly. So even when the anecdotal studies got pushed very hard, when they actually did a full study on them, the science now points out there's no effect, and it's not something that we recommend. And then here is the funny part about ivermectin. And again, Queen, I know you're not talking about ivermectin, but I'm just using it as an example. The funny part is it's still a pharmaceutical. So you're being told by a bunch of people run from the pharmaceutical, but people were claiming this other issue that costs more than a vaccine that actually is a pharmaceutical. And so I'm just throwing out that so the charlatan stuff gets played by those who lie. The science doesn't care what my opinion is, what Bonk's opinion is. If you go look at the science for what it is, there is no the science has no side. So there's not charlatans when it comes to being able to read the science for what it is. A lot of those who push those anecdotal studies will not own up to the actual factual studies that now exist that prove them wrong on a large scale. So that's an example. Let me read this thing and I'm off this thing. All right, let me see.
But that's what makes you a charlatan, is that you don't use science and you come up with your own thing.
Yeah,
that's the charlatan.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, King, I'm gonna let you go, man, so I can read this piece from my book and I'm out this thing.
All right, brother. Peace.
And we do these mostly on Wednesday night. Sometimes I have to move it to Thursday. But tonight, every night, I end with a piece from my upcoming book by the same name, Just My 3 Cents. The full name of the book is Necessary Conversations, Just My 3 Cents on Race, Sex, and Culture. I will have pre-sales coming out pretty soon. I just finished the last bit of editing. I have to send it off to my editor to finalize that. So you should see pre-sale soon. This piece right here this was written back in 2015. This piece is called Black Socrates Speaks, the best analogy ever about police brutality. The best analogy ever about police brutality. I've been going back and forth recently about the effectiveness of the Black Lives Matter movement. And if you're like me, you're exasperated with having to explain what this issue is. Everyone wants to offer remedies for everything but the root cause. It's like having a cough, i.e., police brutality, but people are more upset if you don't cover your mouth, i.e., protest/riot. When you cough, the focus becomes how rude it is not to cover your mouth, and they will refuse to give you any cough syrup until you do so. They act as if covering your mouth will stop the cough. Then there's black on black crime. It's the equivalent of having a headache at the same time as the cough. But when you ask for some cough medicine, i.e., stopping police brutality, the reply is, isn't your headache worse, i.e., black on black crime? You're thinking, but I asked you for some cough syrup. They will then explain they don't have anything for your headache, but you should definitely deal with the headache before the cough. But of course, this is only after they said you probably got the cough because you didn't wear a coat outside. So basically, it's your own fault. Keep in mind, they already have the cough medicine because they have a cough too, and more than likely, you got your cough from them. Not only are you left to deal with the headache on your own, but they're still upset over you intentionally coughing in their face for refusing to give up the cough medicine in the first place. You may have to read that one to understand what I just shared, but it's really just showing the silliness of putting those two things side by side as if they go hand in hand. And if you've enjoyed this conversation tonight, and look at the actual numbers, the reality is the police are not out here trying to have a murder rate for us as African Americans. When you look at the actual numbers, also the number of people that are killing each other is so minimal. Again, not to minimize those deaths, but 99.99% of the community will not be involved. Media sensationalizes tragic deaths to be understood for them to make their money, but we will actually treat that issue more importantly, like Brother Unk said, than being educated about COVID-19, for example. And again, regardless of what side of you're on, if we can be dismissive of 60,000 deaths, then why are we extra concerned about, again, 9,000 deaths, when the reality is most of us will not be involved. Very few African Americans are involved in murdering other African Americans. That's a truth. Just like we no longer are demonizing marijuana, and it took 100 years for marijuana to lose the bad narrative in order to be legalized in this country. So let's lose the bad narrative about Black people as if we don't care about each other being killed, when there's no actual facts to that. You think about your own life. You may have argued with a liberal and a conservative over Black on Black murder because that's what the narrative that's been pushed. But in your argument, don't either one of you know a bunch of Black people who don't care about killing one another? You can't. That's how few people do it, unless you are living that lifestyle or in one of those high crime areas. The majority of us do not live in those areas. That's the actual fact. I have the data to back it. Stop buying into narratives that are not true. With that said, I hope we made it make sense, and I'm out.